hear that 5 minutes twice, and that's made me twice as determined to go slightly more than 5 minutes, if only to irritate you. But can I first of all thank Shane and Fran for hosting this event. Can I also thank those that put together Project Auckland. I just thought it was a great document that was designed and achieved the stimulation of constructive discussion around where we're going as a city. And it's great. You know, I can't always say that we get constructive discussion through the media, but that certainly was a document that met that in every respect. I'm not going to acknowledge everybody. Grant Robertson, who's not yet with us, but young man that I put on the front bench of the Labour Party when I was leader of the Labour Party, the only newcomer, but a guy that I think has tremendous ability. I'll say that when he's not listening. I tell him what Auckland needs when he is. If I can acknowledge our Deputy Mayor, Bill Cashmore. Where are you, Bill? Wave your hand. Right in front of me. God, the last place I would have looked. Desley Simpson, I think maybe Richard Hills is here as well. MPs Helen White and Andrew Bailey, so Ian Taylor, Matt Brown, and I'm going to stop there. Distinguished guests I'll finish on. That covers everybody. This is a very different occasion from a year ago, just over a year ago, when we last met in the area of Project Auckland. I think it was at the Northern Club. And at that stage, I went back and looked at my speech, and I talked so optimistically about the year ahead. This is about 3 weeks before lockdown, about a city that was making huge progress on its infrastructure, the boom in commercial and residential construction. We were about to host the Year of Auckland 2021, some stellar international events, starting with the America's Cup and finishing with the APEC leaders meeting. Well, suddenly, shortly after our last meeting, hope it doesn't happen again, the world changed. And for the first time, I think, in any of our lifetimes, we faced a pandemic that affected the world and inevitably our country. And for the first time, we closed our borders. I thought it was a very courageous act, closing our borders when it first happened. It was exactly the right thing to do. And the outlook at that stage really looked grim. We looked like we were going to lose a lot of people, inevitably, in a pandemic, and it looked like we were facing the worst recession from right back to the 1930s. And I think the positive thing today that we're celebrating here is that through good leadership and collective effort, and I think both of those things are incredibly important, we've been spared the worst of what was forecast. Loss of lives has been limited in a world where over 2 million people have died. Our hospital system wasn't overwhelmed. And by and large, you know, with the exception of a period under level 4, we've been able to live reasonably normally. That's not to say that sections of our economy haven't been hard hit in this city. And we've been hardest hit in this city because we were the gateway city and we relied so much on our international tourists and our international students. However, I think the news in the last 24 hours has been very positive, and we'll probably ask Grant about it. The prospect of opening up a travel bubble with Australia in the next month. If we're able to do that before the end of the year with China as well, then that's a very big percentage of our international visitors to this country that we would be able to have back. And if we can roll out that vaccination program quickly and effectively, that makes a wider opening up of the world, not all parts of the world, but much of the world, hopefully by the end of this year or early next year. We saw the economic figures out for the last quarter of calendar year 2021, and we were in recession. Well, not technically, it takes 2 quarters, but that and the second quarter of last year shows the impact that this has had on the economy. But if you looked carefully, I think in the pages of the Herald this morning, you compare New Zealand with the countries we might like to be compared with, Australia, Canada, the United States and the United Kingdom. Actually, economically, as well as in health terms, this country and this city has done really well. The sad thing, apart from the impact that this has had on a number of our businesses, is the impact it's had on the international events that we were going to host. All but one of them have been lost. But hey, this week we celebrate that one, a spectacular win in the America's Cup. Councillor Simpson and I were down there. Shall I tell them that you were dancing like a teenager, Desley? No, I won't say that. But what a magnificent feeling. And as we looked, and we were down in the Cup Village, and we were looking at the screen, and there was Rangitoto in the background, the beautiful sparkling waters of the Waitemata. We were showcasing our sportsmanship, we were showcasing the design and the technology, we were showcasing a beautiful city and harbour, and we were showcasing a stable and well-governed country that was doing better than most in terms of the COVID crisis. And look, I don't know what money you put on that. We didn't get the money that we thought we were going to get from the international tourists and the super yachts, but I don't think you can put a value. You can't quantify the value on how we projected ourselves to the world. And I've got to say, we were incredibly proud that night. The atmosphere around town, it was just like Christmas Eve. I mean, people were so positive. Collectively as a city, we were so happy, and that was fantastic. Now, the tougher challenge is keeping the defence of the Cup here, and anyone that has any influence in this area, I hope we can persuade Team New Zealand that the infrastructure that we've invested in, it's there and ready to be used again, and we would dearly love them to do that. And if they want more money for the hosting rights, then they should go and talk to the government. But the council has played its part, and I just do want to, I saw Dean Kimpton before, who started off the process. Really fantastic. We got the infrastructure done on time in a hugely tight time frame and under budget. That was good. You're standing up for a reason, and that's a real pity. I want to. I just want to say something. We got through. COVID has whacked us hard in terms of our budget. I'm going to finish on this topic. It's whacked us hard. We put through an emergency budget where we've become a leaner organisation, where we've sold off the surplus property that we're able to, where we've negotiated with Standard & Poor's to have a better debt-to-revenue ratio, and that's within prudential limits. And in the current budget, what we're calling the 10-year budget, the recovery budget, we're looking at building on that. So we'll have the biggest ever investment in infrastructure in our city's history. $31 billion worth of Aucklanders' money going into infrastructure to tackle the problems that have been there for far too long. And some of the things that we're going to achieve are really quite spectacular. We'll have probably 150 million people travelling by public transport. That's the passenger trips. Our percentage of the morning peak hour will go from 23% to 29% using public transport, walking and cycling. We're going to cut our road toll by 65%, and last year we cut it, with a little bit of help from COVID, by about 40%. We're going to have a more resilient water supply with the investment we've made to cater for growth and to climate change. There are lots of problems ahead of us, but there's a lot to celebrate about being part of this city. And you have been standing patiently for a long time, Shane. My apologies. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa.
Thank you, Phil.
I have to stand here.
Yes, thank you, Phil. And thank you very much for those comments. And we do have 5 minutes, approximately 5 minutes before the Minister joins us. So I do welcome questions from the floor for the Mayor. I wanted to really tap into two key areas. It's hard to know, actually, reading Project Auckland, just where to start, because there are many, many issues on your plate, and you've talked about a lot of them today. But first up, the America's Cup. Were you blindsided by the fact that Team New Zealand was looking elsewhere, and what role, if you're not going to be providing any further funding, what role will you play in terms of convincing the government or otherwise?
Yeah, we did come to the party, and it's not easy for a council to find $112 million, which we invested in infrastructure. And I've got sports clubs all over our city that would have loved access to that money. So we've made it clear that we're not, we were happy to do the infrastructure. We're happy to do a bit more in the way of infrastructure. When the next Cup is held here, the end of Wynyard Quarter, which has been hazardous substance tanks, will be a beautiful headland park. We'll have finished the work on Quay Street. We'll have the waterfront park next to the ferry building. Te Komititanga is being developed, and the old post office building is opening in a couple of weeks' time. This is a fantastic place to host it. Peter Burling knows that. You could tell from his comments. the fact that they had the city and the country behind them was hugely valuable. Will they stay here? Well, there's two sides to New Zealand, to the America's Cup. One is a sporting event where they represent New Zealand, and if you look at it from that lens, of course they'd hold it here. The other side, that it's a business, and they are maximising what they can get in terms of a hosting fee. The government will negotiate around that. I'm not going to preempt the government, but I don't think we're in the business of trying to compete with Abu Dhabi, Dubai, or even the Isle of Wight if a billionaire is putting up a huge sum of money. There has got to be a reasonable level that we could settle on, the government could settle on, to keep the cup here, but we provide all of the other things, the best possible venue for a yacht race, including a village in the centre of town.
Thanks, Mr. Goff. Now, I don't know if you've read the Simon Wilson column this morning. Very good column on the future of Auckland's port.
Is there a pole around here that I can dance around?
It is a point that Wayne Brown has made strongly, and obviously at a business lunch just recently. Why haven't you met with Wayne Brown and his team and acknowledged the work that they've done, along with government? This does seem, as Simon Wilson pointed out this morning, disgraceful.
Do you want one barrel or both? The first barrel is they met with us just once, and they came out with a report that said Aucklanders might have $1 billion invested in this wharf, but we're taking it away and they don't deserve any compensation. They came up with a report that I had strongly pushed for and endorsed when it was set up, and they produced something without a business case that we could rely on. They were billions of dollars out in their figures, as Treasury pointed out. Their process was crap, their figures were wrong, and I remain to be convinced that setting a port on the northern extremity of the Auckland region and the Golden Triangle is the best place to put a port. We've got to think about what works for Auckland in terms of providing our consumers and our businesses at a reasonable price, and we've got to have an alternative that works, and they failed to look at the alternatives that they were meant to look at, and the Saperi report made that abundantly clear, as did the future port study that Council had done several years earlier. I'm ashamed of that. Was the worst piece of public process I've seen in a lifetime of politics. Do I feel strongly about that? Not really. Thank you.
I think we got both barrels. Thank you, Mr. Goff. Are there any questions from the floor? If just picking up the port issue, because it is a major one, obviously. So what does this mean for the next steps in terms of another working group, more commissioned reports? Where are we heading?
Well, we're all a bit tired of working groups, but you have to have, you're talking about probably the investment of maybe $10, $12 billion in relocating a port. And you have to, the very first thing to do right when you're going to spend that amount of money is to get your business case right, to do it thoroughly, to do it professionally, to do it competently, and that job, which I hoped that group would do, needs to be done now. And, will Auckland be paying for the relocation of the port? Well, at that price, no, but the government would have to come to the party with infrastructure. Look, I believe that the port does have to be relocated. We've probably got a maximum life there of about 30 years. I'd love that port back for the benefit of the people of Auckland, but at the moment it is a working port that serves the economic needs of our city and its people, and we have to have a proper alternative to that before we make the decision to go.
Great. I'm aware that time is up, and I think we do have the Minister on the line. So once again, a round of applause, please, for Mayor Phil Goff. Thank you, Phil. Appreciate it. Yes, thank you. So right on the button, we are now joined by our Deputy Prime Minister, Finance Minister, Sports Minister and Racing Minister, Grant Robertson. He wears a man of many hats, and it's, at least we've got an image up on the wall of him. But Grant, can you hear us? Hearing. Hello, Minister. Grant, can you hear us? Try again. Grant, can you hear us? No. We'll just sort out these technical difficulties before we move on, obviously. You can hear us, Grant?
I can. Sorry, Shane.
Great. Well, that's great. We've sorted out the technology. Just on behalf of us all here in Auckland, there's a room here of more than 100 people, of the movers and shakers. And we've just heard from our Mayor, Phil Goff, just touching on some of the many issues that, that obviously the city and the region is facing. And I know for the next 15 minutes we'll hear from you on the central government's perspective. And then we all have the opportunity for another 15 minutes to question you. So, Minister, please take it away.
Well, thanks, Shane. Kia ora, ngā mihi nui kia koutou katoa. Greetings, everybody. I'm sorry I can't be with you there. Even from the small screen I have in front of me, I can see that it truly is the good and the great of Auckland, not only the Mayor, but I think I might see my counterpart Andrew Bailey there in the room as well. So truly you are blessed with the attendance of many significant and important people today. I am sorry I can't be with you, just trying to juggle a number of different priorities today after the delay of the original event when I would have been in the room with you. I feel, obviously, with the Room of Aucklanders, the thing you're really looking forward to today is a Wellingtonian telling you exactly what you should be doing with the city, and so I'm very aware of that. I'm very aware of the work that's gone in through a number of different people in the room, but also through the Project Auckland piece of work to try to draw together some really important threads about the future of the city and the region. And I've read it with interest. I've had a number of conversations with the Mayor and we'll have many more, I'm confident. And so I'm very aware, Phil, too, of the work you're doing to draw out some of these themes. What I thought I'd do in the next few minutes is go through a couple of the core areas of work that we do have underway and the partnerships that we do have running. And then in the spirit of events organised by NZME that I'm involved in, I thought I might provoke 3 or 4 opportunities that I see for the city that I think we can work together on, but that we need to make sure we really do grab a hold of if we're going to see Auckland thrive and grow in a sustainable way. So in terms of the first, and also I'll briefly touch on the America's Cup because I'm sure that'll be a question that I'll get asked regardless. Firstly, just to be really clear about the appreciation the government has for the role of Auckland in our economy and our society. A small country like New Zealand needs a large international city, and Auckland is our international city. The other cities in New Zealand all have their charms and all have their roles to play, but Auckland is our genuine international city. And that means that we've got to, as a central government, have a relationship, a partnership, and that includes resourcing with the city and the region that's commensurate with that. And that's why when you look at areas like transport and housing and the investments we make in infrastructure, that Auckland will always be getting a share that is equivalent to, if not slightly ahead of, the population that the city has. And that's important to us that we recognise that role, and you certainly have my support and appreciation for that. The second introductory thought that I wanted to share with you is that any city that requires a retrofit of itself while people are living in it goes through frustrations. And I do want to outwardly acknowledge that. If we could go back in time and we all embraced Mayor Robbie's ideas from the mid-1960s onwards, we perhaps wouldn't be having some of the conversations we're having now today about transport. As a result, we're having to retrofit the fact that we didn't, obviously I wasn't around, and even Phil Goff was only a long-haired student protesting at that point, so even he can't be blamed for not taking up Mayor Robbie's ideas. But all of us now have to accept that we're retrofitting the city. And that means disruption through, as you're seeing now with the city rail link. But it's also why when we come to projects like light rail or mass transit, I don't buy the argument that was advanced by some people that, quote, 10 or 15 years of road cones is something that can actually, in some senses, be avoided. The city needs to be future-proofed. The old saying is that the best time to plant a tree is 30 years ago, and the second best time is today. We didn't plant it in the case of Auckland Transport all that time ago, and we now need to do it now. But I want to acknowledge at the outset the frustration that some of this can cause, but our commitment to work together to make sure that we do that development in a way that allows the city to keep operating and running in the meantime. Obviously, in recent days, we've seen the finalisation of the next phase of ATAP, of the Auckland Transport Alignment Project. This is a very, and this began under the previous government, didn't fund it properly, but did begin under the previous government and carried on by our governments, is a really important way of making sure that we have a clear pipeline of work for Auckland's transport program. It is vast, it is multifaceted, it is an attempt to try and modernise parts of the transport sector and move us more towards sustainable transport choices. It will never be perfect. It's the result of a negotiation, and ultimately there has to be an envelope of money, but the $30-odd billion involved here is a significant long-term commitment to working with the city to make sure that we unlock the congestion, that we provide alternatives. And I'm particularly pleased that as part of the latest iteration, we are piloting the Community Connect card. And this is the idea that this will reduce public transport fares by 50% for community service card holders, maybe what the estimate's around 2.7 million more public transport trips in Auckland in the first year, which obviously helps to both ease congestion and reduce emissions. I'm really pleased that we're piloting that in Auckland. I think it's the right place to do that, and it adds to other projects in walking and cycling and public transport that will be very significant around emissions reduction, along with the roading work that is part of this as well. What I want to make sure we do, and we have done here, and we want to make sure we do further into the future, is ensure the development that we're proposing is integrated. And so this ATAP package actually supports the delivery of 17,000 kāinga ora homes across Tāmaki, Mount Roskill, Mangere and more. And that wouldn't be happening if we didn't have the integrated transport and urban development investment. It is essential we bring those two things together. The Auckland Housing Program is another initiative that we've built on that will, is seeing thousands of houses both being built now in consent in the pipeline. The two of those projects have to go together. Yes, we can develop in greenfields areas, but we've got to make sure that there's good quality, sustainable transport links to back that up. And yes, we can intensify. We can do brownfields development, and we can intensify in our cities in a way that works. All of those things go together, but they only work if we're considering transport and housing as part of the same package. And it's very much what we're doing. One of my roles as a fairly newly minted Minister for Infrastructure is to be helping draw together the work in housing, the work in transport and wider urban development, so that we've got a coherent package of infrastructure projects. There's a pipeline for industry to know what's happening, and Aucklanders can have some confidence about their future development. In terms of specific projects, obviously in the one that's of great interest is the future of light rail or mass transit. Minister Wood and I have been working through this, and Minister Wood aims to bring some next steps in front of Cabinet in the next month or so, and then we'll be able to take that back out to the community. It is an important project. It remains an important project for Auckland, but scoping it in the right way and in a way that has social licenses is very important to us. I just want to move, because I want to leave plenty of time for questions, Shane. I just want to move to some thoughts on some opportunities and challenges and put them out there for a bit of discussion. The first of those is around the America's Cup, or more broadly around events. And, congratulations not only to Team New Zealand, but to everybody involved in making sure that the America's Cup event went off well under very trying circumstances. The partnership between central government and the Auckland Council to develop the facilities down at the Wynyard Quarter has been something, that will now be a legacy for generations to come. It also enables us to host future regattas in a way that is sustainable. Of course, I would love to see the America's Cup hosted in New Zealand again, and the discussions around that have been built in to the agreements we have with Team New Zealand will begin soon, I'm sure. But what I also want to note are the words of Stephen Tindall that I saw in the media yesterday, which is his starting point from a Team New Zealand point is that this should be an event that can effectively look after itself and fund itself. Central government and local government are there, as we have been, to support elements of the event and of the infrastructure. But as Stephen says, this is an area where they need their commercial sponsors. We'll keep working with them. We'll keep supporting them. We'll keep doing what we can to make sure that New Zealanders who have loved having the event here keep having it. But there are a lot of discussions to go on there and some commercial considerations that have been well and truly publicly aired. So that's where we are on that. But I recognise the significant role it's played now over multi-decades in both developing Auckland's infrastructure, creating events, and making sure that there is a steady flow of visitors when that is possible for these. But it's more broadly on those next steps around other major events, and I think Auckland Unlimited, there's a reservoir of knowledge there, and I would really encourage Auckland to come together about what other major events it wants and come to the government with ideas for that, because again, as a large international city looking ahead to return to travel internationally, there's real opportunity there for us. In regard to that, Auckland does need, and Phil and I have had this conversation, to get a clear plan on stadia. So if I can change hats for a second to the Minister of Sport and Recreation, it is vitally important that we get a clear path forward on how that is going to work. I know that work is underway. And again, central government is here to talk about what might be able to be done there, but nothing can happen until we see a clear plan coming forward from Auckland on that. The other area that I wanted to a couple of other areas I just wanted to raise around further future partnerships. One is I think in Auckland you are very blessed by the work that Ngāti Whātua have been doing. They are an impressive outfit when it comes to some of their commercial work, and are obviously, as mana whenua, deeply rooted in Tamaki Makaurau. They are, I know, willing partners in a number of developments, and I think there's an enormous opportunity in the future sustainable development of Auckland for greater partnerships with Ngāti Whātua, with other iwi who associate with the wider Auckland region as well. And from a central government point of view, we want to do what we can to support and facilitate that. But there was a real moment for me watching as the boat returned and was greeted back in by Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei, the real partnership, and hats off to Grant Dalton and others for the work they did there, the real partnership that had been developed, similar with other work that the council's been doing. I think that's an untapped area or further to be tapped area of opportunity for the Auckland region. I will make this the last one. I do have others. We also need to think about how we manage in the Auckland region to further use the new tools that are available for financing of infrastructure. Government passed the Infrastructure Funding and Financing Act towards the end of the last Parliament. That creates the opportunity for special purpose vehicles that can drive development but lift that off the balance sheet of local government and of central government and bring in private iwi and other investors. In Auckland, you know what this looks like because the Milldale development is the precursor of this. We want and we are open for business around ideas that can make use of the infrastructure funding and financing regime that we put in action. And I offer that opportunity out there for Auckland to be right up the front of making use of that. I will leave it there. Could talk a bit further about the port. I'm sure someone might want to ask about it. And also climate-related leadership and the place of Auckland. And I want to hats off to Phil and his council who have really started to move forward on that. There's a big place for us to draw together New Zealand's presence on the global stage as a country that markets itself as clean and green and actually lives up to that, and Auckland's place in that as well. But happy to talk about that further. And any questions? Kia ora tātou.
Kia ora. Thank you, Minister. A round of applause, please, for the Minister and his and lots of talking points. I'll kick off the Q&A session with a few of my own, but please, questions are most welcome from the floor. I know that there'll be lots of interest in a lot of those topics that the Minister's just touched on. Minister, just starting with the America's Cup, can you give us an indication? The $5 million to keep the team together in the initial period's been described this morning as a drop in the bucket. What is your own appetite for another 50 million, whatever, and around the cabinet table to keep the event here?
I think we're like all New Zealanders, Shane, or most New Zealanders, that we would love to see the Cup hosted here again. The $5 million figure is the same approximately amount that has been given by previous governments in the wake of CUP campaigns to keep the core of the team together. It's by no means meant to be, this is the one-shot deal or anything like that. But we've got considerations, obviously, around many other things that the government is asked to fund or needs to fund and support. Ultimately, it does, it provides us with a huge injection of national pride and so on, and that's significant to us, but it has to stack up economically in terms of our investment. We went down the path in this particular version of the CUP to invest heavily in infrastructure. Of the $136.5 million that the government put in, around 113 of that was related to those infrastructure investments, the rest to the event hosting and leveraging off that, particularly in terms of educational programs and so on. So that was a big investment from us. We're happy to sit down and talk. You'll probably understand I'm not going to negotiate sums of money via you today, but we're happy to have those conversations. But ultimately, there will always be a limit to what central government can do. And I come back to what I said in my opening comments, that I listened to the words of Sir Stephen about the fact that as an entity, they want to be able to do this on their own 2 feet. There are huge commercial considerations. There is no way that the government could pay for the whole thing, and no one's asking for that. But there are also limits to what we can do. So let's see what we can achieve. Like everybody else, I'd love to see us carry on hosting it, and we'll have those discussions over the coming months.
We'll switch it slightly further to the east of Auckland and the port. And before you joined us, we certainly heard the views of Mayor Goff around Wayne Brown's work group and the process that was followed or not.
Was that a 2-word or a 3-word sentence?
Oh, it was a 4-letter word.
Oh, right.
No, it wasn't that bad.
Not good.
But having said that, and Simon Wilson has touched on it in the Herald this morning, just around the process that was or wasn't followed following the release of the report. Where do you stand on that? Why haven't you met with Wayne Brown and the team or developed that further? And is it easier now with Winston Peters away from the cabinet table to get something achieved?
Oh, look, I wouldn't put it necessarily in those terms, but quite clearly, with the last government, the group was set up. I've heard Phil's concerns about the way it operated. I'm certainly aware that within the government there were people who had very strong views about where the future of the Upper North Island ports might go. The position we find ourselves in now is taking stock of that report and indeed of the many others that have been done around the future of Upper North Island ports. And Minister Wood, once we get the mass transit work through Cabinet, will then turn his mind and our mind to the next steps with the port. What I would say is I don't know anybody who I've talked to who thinks from the sort of mid-2030s onwards that Auckland as port as we know it now can be the kind of export port or import port that it even is today. And so therefore we do need to look at alternatives. There are a range of those. For me, and I'm not the first Minister of Infrastructure to say the following words, we need to look at our port strategy both nationwide and as a North Island strategy as well. And I think when we do that, and we do that with objective information, and we do that looking at the future proofing of our maritime industry, we'll come up with some more concrete ideas. So we'll use the report that Wayne and his team did, but I think there is more work to do there.
Minister, any questions from the floor? Carry us on those similar themes. Yes, Mark. Mark, you will need the microphone. And if you can, please introduce yourself.
Sure, Grant. Hi, Mark Thomas with the Committee for Auckland and Service Works. Grant, wouldn't your job be easier if more of these numerous Auckland projects that were on your to-do list, more the responsibility of Auckland to decide and resolve on? Putting aside the how, in principle, don't you think Auckland could make more progress if it was more in control of the planning and funding and decision-making issues? We look at some of the cities around the world we compare ourselves to, Copenhagen, Austria. Their governments have given those cities more control of some of these levers. I know there's big questions about how much and how, but just in principle, don't you think our largest city should have more of a capacity to do more for itself?
Yeah, well, thanks for the question, Mark. I think when you look at something like ATAP, that's exactly what we've recognised, or the previous government started it, and we've carried on, that we've recognised that if we do sit down together at a table and make sure we hammer out something that works for the region, then that's much more preferable than central government coming and saying this is exactly what you're going to do and there's no two ways about it. So I think we already do elements of that. For some of the other larger big projects, again, I didn't hear what Phil had to say today about the port, but I've heard him say it to me before. And I think there's a legitimate criticism of the approach in the last term of government that we didn't engage sufficiently well with the people who we needed to in terms of Auckland Council. So I think, Mark, I'd rather do it as a partnership. I don't think, there are parts of what happens in Auckland that are fully within control of Auckland. That's good. When it comes to central government funding, I'll always want to be at the table myself to be able to support it. But I do recognise we can't dictate that. We need to do it with you.
Great, thank you, Minister. I will just carry on with some questions, but please more welcome from the floor. You touched on stadia. What's your own personal view, Minister, and does that tie in with the port's argument, I guess, as well, around does Auckland, in your view, need and deserve one international stadium?
Look, I've got a lot of personal views about it, but they're probably not that relevant. What I would say is that when you look at, again, large international cities who want to host big events, there tends to be at least one very large stadium or an adaptable stadium that you can use. I'm not going to sit here today and dictate where that is. There have been a lot of different proposals down at the waterfront, redevelopments of Eden Park, redevelopments of Mount Smart. All of those things could be the solution. All I'm saying is I think it's an area where I'm looking at events, looking at my role as the Minister of Sport and Rec, where I think that Auckland can do better, frankly, than where you are. I don't think that's contested. Everybody agrees with that. The Mayor had a crack with some things around Western Springs and so on that didn't quite work the way he wanted, let alone the way everyone else might have wanted it. So my view is we're on the right path of bringing it all together. That's being done. Now it's about getting the plan in place of what the kind of network of facilities look like. And there are, as I've just listed off, there are a multiplicity of options about what could be done.
Great, thank you. I want to just switch it up slightly to the business sector and in particular the hospitality sector, as well as others that are really now feeling the pinch here in Auckland. We witnessed in the last lockdown, just some of the impacts that are coming through with various restaurant closures and some staffing layoffs. Has the government reflected on the most recent lockdown, the way that was conducted, and change and considered ways of changing the approach next time, in particular in regards to the different alert levels and the way that they I guess, are administered and governed?
Yeah, after any resurgence, we always take the time to go back and look at what we could do better. One thing I would say this time round that worked better, other than the very first night, was the so-called Auckland boundary or border. Once we got through that period of everyone returning to town, the ability of people who needed to go about their business and were able to safely go about their business in level 3 worked well. And our sort of broad stats tell us that the productivity we get at level 3 is much higher than was originally projected because businesses can safely operate. Bear in mind, there's no such thing as an essential business at level 3. It's simply whether a business can safely operate under the rules. And we've seen some really great work done by businesses to adapt to that. In terms of the decision making about the alert levels and how that works, we have to follow the advice of our experts. It's how New Zealand has managed to do so well relative to the rest of the world up to now, is that we've done that. The alert level changes are disruptive. We get that. It's the reason why just before Christmas I put out a clear statement about what happens now when there are alert level changes. So we brought in the new resurgence support payment that's available when we go above alert level 1. It's a payment not tagged. It's for any costs that a business has. Got a per business cost and then an FTE per FTE funding on top of that, up to 50 FTEs. I haven't got the numbers in front of me here today, but we'll be well into the 100 to 200 million at least amount of money that's gone into Auckland off the back of that. And then when we go to alert level 3, we recognise that as truly restrictive, particularly on the likes of hospitality and others. And so that's why that wage subsidy becomes then available again there. And again, we're in the hundreds of millions that's gone out for this most recent outbreak. So we still think that's the best way to manage that. More broadly, the best thing I continue to believe we can do for the hospitality industry is get back to long sustained periods of level 1. And when we look around the world relative to other countries, the ability of those hospitality and other tourism related businesses to be able to operate is predicated on us being able to operate at normal levels in society. Other countries haven't had that. They've been at the equivalence of levels 3, 4, and occasionally 2 for long periods. So the best thing we can do for the industry is to continue to the strong health approach we've got that gives us long sustained periods of operating in a relatively normal way. So, we're continuing to talk to industries. Minister Nash has given a bit of a speech in Queenstown today around some of our future thinking around how we might support the tourism industry. So we recognise that there are ongoing needs, but we'll live and learn off each of these resurgences, hoping that we won't have any more.
And we will stay on the COVID thing. I think there are some questions coming from the floor, but just on, and Michael Barnett's written an excellent column in Project Auckland just about shaking this whole thing up. Why aren't we, well, we may well be. You can tell us, are we targeting the COVID billionaires who are now looking for areas to invest? What's the government doing in terms of really future forward thinking for not just the city and the region of Auckland, but the entire country?
Absolutely, and in fact we've set some money aside for our investor attraction strategy. Minister Nash is leading that piece of work as Minister of Economic Development, and being tasked with working with a number of people who where there are leads on people who want to come here. Look, we saw with Microsoft when they announced that they wanted to put the data centre here last year, that there are real opportunities for us. We've got a number of specific approaches and a number of more general ones, and we want to capitalise on not just the way the government or New Zealand has handled COVID, but we continue to consistently be number 1 or number 2 in the world in Transparency International's Freedom from Corruption Index. We are still and consistently still number 1 in the world in the World Bank's Ease of Doing Business Index. It is a place people want to come to, and now with COVID, they feel that New Zealand will both be a safe place, and also, some of the images around the world of things like the America's Cup and so on, resonate really strongly. So yes, active piece of work that's underway there. Obviously, we're also continuing through the COVID period to have people come in. We have our economic exceptions category. I know it's been the subject of some controversy, but it remains a part of what we're doing. I think we'll be up around 130,000 people who've been through managed isolation since March last year. The vast bulk of those are returning New Zealanders, but we have throughout the period kept a small part of that available for people who are needed for significant economic projects, who are needed for events, be they sporting or cultural or musical, that generate economic activity. And bear in mind, the America's Cup happened because we made those exceptions, and the spin-off benefits for Auckland have been huge. So we'll keep working with the business community on how we bring people in the short term, but yeah, that is very much part of our work, and Minister Nash is leading that for us.
Thank you, Minister. We do have some questions from the floor. So Ian Taylor.
Minister, hello, how are you?
Kia ora, Ian. Nice to see you.
You too. Hey, just back to the America's Cup. Would the government consider, taking in Sir Stephen Tyndall's comments today, would you consider doing what most teams have and becoming a sponsor of the team so that the name New Zealand is always on the boat, no matter where in the world it's sailed?
Yeah, thanks, Ian. And I saw your words and comments about what might happen if it goes offshore, and it well worth people having a read of if you haven't already. Look, I'm not gonna say yes or no to that now. What I do know is that the Team New Zealand brand is extremely strong, and as a government, we've invested over, and it's not just the governments I'm part of, but previous governments as well, have invested heavily in, I guess, the broader sense of the IP of Team New Zealand, be it in the sailors, or be it in the technology, or be it in the facilities, and so we obviously have an attachment to not only, for obvious reasons, the name, but also the broader work that's gone on. So, yep, that's an idea, I guess, that can be considered as part of our discussions. But I take the point in your article that actually, if it does keep the name and the event did end up offshore, there is, in some senses, a way of finding a different kind of exposure, but an exposure for New Zealand. And one of the issues we have is that it tends to come down in the finals, particularly to the fact that we've been huge in Italy in the last couple of weeks, but maybe not as huge in other markets. And so I take the point you're making that there are possibilities, if it were to end up being hosted offshore, where New Zealand could still be involved.
Great. Thank you, Minister. We have time for 2 more questions before we wrap up.
Kia ora, Minister. Richard Leggett. Just coming back to the COVID, if we do get a bubble with Australia, that's going to free up a lot of MIQ spaces. Does the government have a view on the hierarchy of who's coming in next? For example, in Auckland, if we were able to bring in a lot more international students with freed up MIQ, that would be a big bonus for the city.
Yeah, thanks, Richard, for the question. 2 answers to that. The first is that there is a slightly counterintuitive aspect of how many spaces get freed up. Michael Baker wrote a little piece about this in the last week or so. We'll be freeing, and we hope to see the bubble soon. We'll be, if and when that happens, we'll be freeing up space of people who are relatively low risk. It's one of the reasons we can do it. And what that means is that we will then have a higher percentage of higher risk people who may end up needing to stay in our facilities for longer. So some of the modelling sees that you don't get a direct 40% back from the 40% who are no longer there, because the people are not the same people and represent different risk profiles. So just to manage some expectations around just how many places, but net there should be more. I absolutely agree with that. And as I say, obviously our first priority remains returning New Zealanders. We have obligations to make sure that New Zealanders can come back. We can't make people stateless, and so we need them. We need to be able to put that up front as our first priority. But then, yes, it does then open up the ability for us to look at more of those economic exceptions and look to where we'll get the best benefit for New Zealand. We've got the beginnings of that. We've got some spaces allocated for international students as part of the current criteria, and I'm sure there'd be further consideration of that as more spaces open up. And bear in mind, I haven't had a chance to pump the vaccine program so far in this talk. Bear in mind, the best thing we can do is get all New Zealanders vaccinated as soon as that is possible, because then we move from having our protective barrier at the border to being a protective personal barrier. And that then opens up in 2022, much more opportunity. The goal of the government is to get everyone vaccinated by the end of the year. And you've seen the vaccine program outlined already. And from July, the full bulk of the population will be have the opportunity to get their vaccine can. I take this opportunity with a group of influential Aucklanders to say, please help us in that. Please be part of the program of supporting and encouraging people who work in businesses that you might own or run or be on the board of to be a part of that. Think about being a business that actually hosts vaccinations, if you're a large business particularly, and work with the Ministry of Health on that, because that is the very best route to making sure that we have those international students in big numbers back on our shores.
Thank you, Minister. And I think, Fran, you'd like to make a point?
Sullivan. Just briefly, Mayor Phil Goff suggested that once we've done the Australian bubble, we could look to do the one with China and potentially get back the bulk of our tourism trade, and obviously there would be students as well. Where does China sit in the government's thinking?
Yeah, look, Fran, I'd have to say that in the short term, we have not been discussing China as a bubble. We've been looking very much at Australia and the Pacific. And I think one of the reasons for that not only is proximity, obviously, but also because we're very clear, particularly in the Pacific, where it's largely COVID-free, but we're very clear about how people come and go. Even within Australia, one of the things that we're taking our time over is that when Australia looks at New Zealand, they're dealing with one country, one set of rules, one administration. When New Zealand looks at Australia, we're dealing with 6 states, all of whom deal with COVID slightly differently from one another. And so we have to make sure we're aware of what the consequences are if there was an outbreak in one state, how we manage that for another, how much do we know about people moving across state boundaries. If you then took that and extrapolated that out to a larger country like China, then those issues are writ large even further. So look, we want to keep moving. We want to keep making progress. Let's get this Trans-Tasman bubble sorted, which I'm confident we'll do soon. Work with our Pacific neighbours and then see how we can build from there. But at the risk of repeating the last answer, the very best thing we can do in terms of wanting to open up fully to people coming across the borders is to make sure that we get everybody vaccinated.
Great, and thank you, Minister. I think that's where we will need to wrap it up. I know that there will be plenty more questions and plenty more discussion after lunch. I know that you're a very busy person and you have other appointments to get away to, but on behalf of us all here in Auckland, Deputy Prime Minister, thank you so much for your time and giving us your answers to our questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Shane.
And if I could also just repeat my thanks to our Mayor, Phil Goff, for also giving us his time and thoughts today. I know that the discussions will continue over lunch. Mains are about to be served, and after that we'll be joined by our panel. So thank you. Enjoy lunch.